Welcome back to CSS Breakdown, book by book season 4, where we're reflecting on Fallen Leaves by Will Durant. In this deep dive, we explore Durant's personal theology, a heartfelt, skeptical, yet reverent meditation on belief, doubt, and the sacredness of life itself. We're about to embark on a deep dive into Durant's intricate relationship with the concept of God and spirituality, something he, renowned for his sweeping historical works like The Story of Civilization, tackles with its surprising intimacy and vulnerability in this particular book.
Yeah, it's quite a shift, isn't it?
It really is. It's a fascinating departure from his usual academic tone, revealing the inner world of a historian who spent a lifetime chronicling human thought and belief.
And what's truly fascinating here is how Durant, a meticulous historian of human thought and belief, turns that same critical yet compassionate lens onto his own spiritual journey.
Right, onto himself.
Exactly. You'll find it's a journey many people, regardless of their background or current beliefs, can deeply relate to, precisely because it isn't about rigid dogma or established religious frameworks.
No, not at all.
Instead, it's a profoundly human quest for meaning, for understanding the universe and our place within it, and for discerning what, if anything, holds true sacredness. He approaches this not as a detached academic treatise, but as a deeply personal confession, almost a testament to his lived experience of intellectual and spiritual evolution.
It feels very confessional.
It does. It's a powerful invitation to consider your own spiritual landscape, free from preconceived notions.
So let's unpack this. Durant wastes no time in setting his stall. He immediately states his position as a theological skeptic.
Start out of the gate.
Yeah. He explicitly rejects what he calls the warlike God of the Hebrews and the punishing and rewarding God of the Christians. That's a pretty strong opening statement for a man who dedicated his life to chronicling human history, including its incredibly rich and often contentious religious dimensions.
It really is. You'd expect maybe more hedging, but no.
Exactly. What then leads him to such a definitive and, frankly, provocative stance right out of the gate? What are the foundational observations that fuel this skepticism he so readily embraces?
Well, he doesn't just declare his skepticism. He builds a compelling case for it through several observations, inviting you to consider their weight alongside him. It's not merely an emotional rejection, but one constructed from his careful observations of the universe and the human experience within it.
Okay.
His first point directly addresses common arguments for a divine creator, the idea of order in the universe.
Oh, the classic design argument.
Precisely. He acknowledges many evidences of order, which is often used as prime evidence for a divine designer. But he immediately, almost forcefully, contrasts this with what he perceives as disorderly conditions.
Okay, so what kind of disorder?
He's talking about phenomena like the reckless whimsies of meteors, or the arrogant deviations of planetary orbits from the paths that our geometry would have required.
So things that don't fit our neat models.
Exactly. He's not just pointing out chaos. He's highlighting things that simply don't fit neatly into a perfectly symmetrical, predictable, or human-desired pattern. Things that seem, well, messy.
That's a sharp distinction. So he sees patterns, but also a lot of things that don't quite align with what we might expect from a perfectly benevolent or meticulous designer, like loose ends in the cosmic tapestry.
Precisely. And crucially, he turns the mirror onto himself when he discusses this. He analyzes his own perspective here, admitting that his conceptions of order and disorder, along with beauty and sublimity and ugliness, are inherently subjective.
So it's his perception.
Yes. They are, as he candidly puts it, my prejudices, acknowledging that his mind simply finds more comfort and intelligibility when it can impose order upon things.
That makes sense. We like patterns.
We do. And the universe, he wisely notes, has no obligations to follow my preferences.
That's a great line.
Isn't it? This is a crucial, almost humbling point for us. It's not necessarily the universe that's flawed, but our human expectation of it, our tendency to project our desires for perfection and order onto a reality that might operate on entirely different, perhaps even indifferent principles.
So our idea of order might just be our preference.
Pretty much. It undermines the very human-centric idea that the cosmos should adhere to our aesthetic or logical demands. We want it to make sense to us.
That self-awareness, that acknowledgement of his own subjective lens, is truly fascinating. It seems to dismantle one of the classic arguments for design by framing our perception of order as a human construct, almost.
Yeah, it really challenges that foundation.
So, if order isn't as universal or perfectly designed as some might assume, What's his next point of contention against traditional theology? Where does he go from there?
Building on that, his second observation delves into the concept of imperfect design in nature itself.
Ah, okay, like biological design.
Exactly. He still sees many evidences of design in nature and myself, even suggesting indications of a cosmic spirit experimenting to find adjustments of means and organs to ends and desires. So he's open to the idea of some kind of creative force or ongoing process. He's not dismissing it outright.
Okay, so he sees something like design or at least experimentation.
Yes, but true to his skeptical method, he immediately introduces a counterpoint. He also observes many instances of organs imperfectly adapted to functions and purposes.
Imperfect adaptations? Like what?
His specific example is the eye as Helmholtz criticized it.
Oh, right. Helmholtz, the scientist.
Exactly. Hermann von Helmholtz, a pioneering German scientist of the 19th century, famously pointed out the numerous flaws and imperfections in the human eye from an optical engineering perspective.
Like the blind spot.
The blind spot, yes. And he meticulously cataloged its optical aberrations, the inverted image, the limited range of focus, things that suggest evolution's gradual tinkering and compromises.
Rather than a perfect blueprint.
Precisely. Far more than a flawless, omniscient, divine blueprint. This scientific critique directly challenges the notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing designer who would create something so jury-rigged from a human standpoint.
Jury-rigged is a good word for it.
It fits, doesn't it? This leads him to question the nature of any cosmic power that might exist, suggesting it's not purely kindly, given events that suggest a more cruel or indifferent streak. If you're designing things and they have these obvious flaws.
Yeah, it doesn't speak to perfection or maybe even pure benevolence.
Right.
And I imagine this direct critique of design, or lack thereof, leads directly into perhaps the most challenging theological problem for any benevolent deity: the undeniable reality of suffering and evil.
Right.
This is where many traditional explanations falter, isn't it?
Precisely. You anticipated it. His third observation, and arguably his most potent argument against the traditional all-powerful and benevolent God, is indeed the problem of suffering and evil.
The big one.
The big one. He notes so much suffering in the world, and so much of it apparently undeserved.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from powerful historical examples that vividly illustrate this point, inviting you to consider their stark implications.
It's like the Lisbon earthquake.
Exactly. He brings up the devastating Lisbon earthquake of 1755, an event that didn't just kill thousands, but specifically slaughtered thousands of pious souls, many of whom were worshiping their God in church.
Right. In church, that detail is just devastating.
It is. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a cataclysm that struck at the heart of religious belief and sparked profound philosophical and theological crises across Enlightenment Europe. Voltaire famously satirized it, questioning divine justice in the face of such indiscriminate destruction.
That's a powerful and specific example. It directly challenges the idea of a God who intervenes, or at least protects the faithful, if the pious aren't safe even during worship.
What does that say? And he extends this argument to the sheer, almost brutal indifference of nature towards individual life. He starkly states that nature obviously cared no more for Spinoza than for the tubercle bacillus that killed him at the age of 44.
Wow. Spinoza, the great philosopher, versus a microbe.
Exactly. Baruch Spinoza, one of history's truly great rationalist philosophers, died prematurely from consumption, likely exacerbated by his work grinding optical lenses, which exposed him to glass dust.
Ah, I didn't know that detail.
Yeah. Durant is pointing out that nature makes no moral distinction between a profound human thinker whose ideas would shape centuries of philosophy and a microscopic disease-causing organism. The cosmic process, in this view, is utterly impersonal.
That's a chilling yet very direct observation about the impersonal nature of existence, at least from our limited human perspective. It forces one to confront the sheer indifference of the cosmos to our individual struggles, our genius, our piety. None of it seems to matter on that level.
None of it seems to guarantee protection or favor. And he extends this critique beyond natural disasters and disease to human institutions themselves.
Okay, so human-caused suffering too.
Yes. He highlights so much war, destruction, crime, corruption, and savagery, even in religious organizations like the medieval church.
Oof. Yeah, that's a tough one for religious institutions.
It is. This is particularly cutting for Durant, as the very institutions that claim to represent a benevolent God have historically been sources of immense suffering, persecution, and injustice. His analysis here is uncompromising. He finds it hard to believe that all this exists by permission of an all-powerful and benevolent deity.
The classic question, If God is good and all-powerful, why allow this?
Exactly. If God is truly all-powerful and all-good, why permit such widespread, seemingly pointless suffering, particularly that which originates from human hands within seemingly sacred structures? It's a question that echoes through centuries of philosophical inquiry, and Durant brings it to bear on his own theological skepticism. He finds no satisfying answer within traditional frameworks.
And his final point in this segment focuses specifically on the barbarity of certain theologies, which is a direct attack on particular doctrines rather than just observations of the world. It shows his moral compass clashing directly with specific religious teachings, doesn't it?
Indeed. His fourth observation directly targets what he considers the barbarous aspects of specific theological doctrines, arguing they are morally indefensible from a developed human perspective.
Which doctrines specifically?
He specifically calls out the Calvinist doctrine of a supreme being who preselects individuals for heaven or endless torture, regardless of their lives, whether they've lived virtuously or viciously. Predestination, essentially.
Predestination. Yeah, that's a tough one for many people.
For Durant, this concept of predestination and arbitrary damnation is morally repugnant. It clashes violently with any notion of justice, compassion, or even basic fairness that he, and indeed many others throughout history, would associate with a benevolent deity.
It feels fundamentally unfair.
Exactly. He implies that if a God exists who behaves in ways that we as humans would deem barbaric, then that God is not worthy of worship or belief by a morally developed mind.
So our ethics should judge our theology.
That's the implication. This raises an important question for you, the listener. How do our deeply held moral sensibilities clash with or shape our theological understandings? Do we reject a concept of God that doesn't align with our highest ethical ideals, or do we attempt to adapt our ethics to fit the perceived will of God?
A critical question.
Durant clearly leans towards the former, allowing his robust human morality to inform his theological critique. He finds no moral redemption in a God that would arbitrarily condemn souls to eternal torment. It simply doesn't compute with his sense of justice.
So these are his 4 pillars of skepticism: the issue with cosmic order, the flaws in natural design, the overwhelming problem of suffering, and the moral bankruptcy of certain theologies. That's a strong foundation for doubt.
It is, and he doesn't just leave it as personal doubt.
Right. So if these are his deeply personal reasons for skepticism, he also ties it into a broader historical narrative, touching on the idea that God is dead. It's a phrase most often attributed to Nietzsche, but Durant suggests it's a concept with deeper historical roots and implications than just a single philosophical proclamation. Where does he see this concept coming from, and how has it unfolded over time?
This is truly where his historian's mind shines, connecting philosophy and science to the grand, sweeping evolution of human belief. He doesn't just present his personal doubt, he situates it within the vast panorama of human intellectual development.
Puts it in context.
Exactly. He explicitly references Nietzsche's Also sprach Zarathustra, published in 1883, where the death of the Christian theological God was joyfully proclaimed.
Nietzsche's famous line.
Yes, but Durant unpacks it. Nietzsche's proclamation wasn't simply a statement of atheism. It was a profound recognition that the foundational values, moral frameworks, and grand narratives underpinned by traditional Christianity were losing their grip on Western society, particularly in the face of scientific advancement, historical criticism, and secularization.
So the influence of that God was dying, in a way.
That's a good way to put it. The cultural power, the explanatory power. And what's particularly striking, Durant notes, is that this isn't just an external critique. He observes that even some young Christian theologians have come to agree that God is dead, indicating that this death isn't merely an attack from outside,
but an internal reckoning.
Yes, a recognition of a profound internal shift within theology itself, a necessary reevaluation of what God could or should mean in a modern context. It speaks to a deep crisis of relevance for the traditional anthropomorphic concept of God.
So it's not just Nietzsche, it's a broader cultural and intellectual phenomenon, almost an inevitability of human progress and changing consciousness. And Durant suggests that this death or transformation of God isn't new. It's part of a historical pattern of what he calls epochal transvaluations of God. This idea of transvaluation is key, isn't it?
Exactly. That term transvaluation is crucial. Durant argues that man's conception of God changes as man's knowledge and moral sense improve.
So God evolves with us, or our idea of God evolves.
Our idea of God evolves, yes. He views these shifts not as minor adjustments, but as epochal transvaluations, meaning fundamental revaluations of value that occur over entire eras, often profoundly unsettling. These aren't just academic debates. They can upset not only philosophers and saints, but also whole nations and eras, causing immense cultural and social upheaval.
Big shifts.
Huge shifts. And he firmly states that we live in such an age, an era where humanity is undergoing another profound shift in its understanding of the divine, driven by new knowledge and evolving ethical sensibilities.
And what's driving this current shift, in his view?
His key insight here is quite provocative. He suggests that the revelations of science and history and the ethics of Christ have made it impossible for developed minds to believe in that grim beard of a God who frightened our forebears into decency.
Yeah, grim beard of a god. That's quite an image.
It is, isn't it? It's his evocative, almost dismissive term for the punitive, patriarchal deity that relied on fear and rigid judgment to enforce morality. For Durant, modern scientific understanding, the lessons gleaned from history, and especially the ethical teachings of Christ himself, have rendered that particular conception of God obsolete for minds that have truly matured beyond a reliance on fear for moral guidance.
That's a truly powerful claim. In this sense, it was Christ who killed Jehovah. I've never quite thought of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense when you consider the shift in emphasis. How can Christ, the central figure of Christianity, be seen as the killer of its own Old Testament deity? It sounds almost paradoxical.
It is a truly profound, almost paradoxical statement, but one that gets to the heart of Durant's ethical framework. It suggests that the ethical teachings of Christ, focused on unconditional love, radical compassion, forgiveness, turning the other cheek, fundamentally superseded the fearful, often wrathful, Old Testament deity known as Jehovah.
The God of law and judgment.
Exactly, who was primarily associated with strict law, judgment, and vengeance. For Durant, the moral evolution brought forth by Christ's teachings ethically invalidated the old fearful God for a mind seeking moral consistency and genuine benevolence.
So the ethics outgrew the earlier conception of God.
That's it perfectly. It's less about a literal death and more about an ethical and philosophical evolution that rendered the grim beard obsolete for those truly embracing Christ's core message. He even notes that the history of humanity might be written in terms of the avatars of God, the repeated death of an old deity and the birth of a new one.
Avatars of God, like different versions throughout history.
Exactly. This cyclical process where every people in every epoch has reinterpreted God after its own fashion and been willing to die or kill in defense of that passing conception shows how deeply ingrained this process is in human civilization.
Wow. That's a sobering thought about religious conflict.
It is. So as a historian, he is entirely prepared to see the idea of God change again, acknowledging that such transformations are not just possible, but historically inevitable. He's seen it happen time and time again in the historical record.
So this is an ongoing, almost inevitable process of reevaluation, and he attributes a significant part of this ongoing transvaluation to the revelations of science, which continually reshape our understanding of the universe and our place in it. Can you explain how specific scientific discoveries acted as catalysts for this radical change in the conception of God?
Absolutely. Durant highlights two pivotal scientific figures who profoundly reshapes humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos and, by extension, its very idea of God. First, he points to Copernicus.
Okay, Copernicus, shifting the center of the universe.
Precisely. Before Copernicus, the Earth was seen as the footstool of God, the fixed, immovable central point of creation around which everything else revolved. This geocentric view naturally lent itself to an anthropocentric conception of God as primarily concerned with humanity, specifically on this unique central Earth.
We were the main event.
Pretty much. The universe was seen as made for us, and God's attention was squarely on our small planet.
That created a certain theological comfort, placing humanity at the center of God's plan. But Copernicus shattered that.
He really did. With Copernicus's heliocentric model, the Earth became but a minimal fraction of the universe, merely one planet orbiting the sun. This astronomical revelation, despite significant initial resistance, forced men to enlarge their idea of God to suit the universe that astronomy was opening to human view.
God had to get bigger, essentially.
Or seem smaller. The old, localized, human-centric God couldn't fit into this vast, expanding cosmos. The deity had to grow exponentially in scope and power to encompass such immensity, or diminish dramatically in relevance. It was a profound challenge to human exceptionalism.
And then, of course, Darwin enters the picture, shifting the focus from space to time, from the cosmic scale to the biological, creating another seismic shift in how humanity viewed itself.
Exactly. As Copernicus lost the Earth in space, Durant says, Darwin lost man in the infinity of time.
That's a great parallel.
Isn't it? Through his theory of evolution by natural selection, Darwin revealed man to be a mere line in nature's interminable odyssey, one of countless transitory species that had walked the earth, swum the sea, or flown the air.
Just another species, ultimately.
In the grand biological scheme, yes. Humanity was no longer a unique, static creation, instantly formed at the pinnacle of a divine plan. Instead, we became a tiny, fleeting part of an unimaginably long and continuous biological process, constantly adapting and changing.
Which directly contradicted Genesis for many.
Profoundly. This profoundly challenged anthropocentric views of creation and God's relationship specifically with humanity. The idea of a special direct creation for humans, as recounted in Genesis, was thrown into question, leading to immense intellectual and religious turmoil.
So, on one hand, these scientific revolutions seem to dismantle old, comforting conceptions of God and humanity's place. They chip away at the foundations.
They definitely do.
But here's where it gets really interesting, as you mentioned. Durant pivots from Darwin eroding old beliefs to Darwin actually opening a path to a new one. He cites John Morley, who called this the next great task of science, to create a new religion for humanity.
Yeah, that's a bold claim. Science creating religion.
It is. And for Durant, this new God is life itself. This is a crucial pivot. How does he elaborate on this profound, almost poetic idea? Because it sounds less like science and more like vitalism.
That's a great point. He beautifully articulates how evolution for him points not to a cold mechanistic universe, but to an active, creative force. He directly counters the mechanistic philosophy of Herbert Spencer, a leading proponent of evolution in his time, who often framed the universe as a giant impersonal machine operating by fixed, unthinking laws.
Just matter and motion?
Pretty much. Durant insists that evolution actually reveals the essence of the cosmic process as not matter, but life. He challenges the mechanistic view by asking, quite simply, how could a machine evolve?
Good question. A machine is static, right?
Exactly. For him, a static, unthinking machine cannot explain the dynamic, adaptive, and endlessly creative process of life. If it were truly just a machine, it would remain inert, predictable, never striving. It wouldn't become more complex.
That's a subtle but significant distinction. So he's not just seeing life as a product of mechanistic forces, but rather as the fundamental, active, even vitalistic principle of the cosmos itself. How does he then describe this active view of evolution? It sounds less random than Darwin might suggest.
He describes evolution not as a passive formation by environment and chance, but as something intensely active, almost willful. He speaks of it as the painstaking modification of environments and the partial regulation of chance by organisms endowed with the ability to experiment and to learn.
Organisms regulating chance. That's interesting.
It is. It's not a fortuitous concourse of aimless variations, meaning random, accidental changes, but rather the insatiable desire that creates organ after organ, molds the body in the image of the will, and remakes the face of the earth.
Insatiable desire. That sounds very purposeful.
It does, doesn't it? This is a profoundly vitalistic view, a dynamic force inherent within existence. For Durant, evolution is not just biology. It's the very expression of a creative, persistent force, a fundamental drive towards growth, complexity, and self-organization.
A life force, essentially.
That's a good way to think of it. This creative force, this insatiable desire, is what leads him to his powerful conclusion. Life itself can be the new God. It's a bold redefinition, elevating the very process of existence, the ongoing current of growth and change, to a divine level. It's a reverence for the dynamic unfolding of reality.
That sounds almost spiritual rather than purely scientific. He talks about it feeling like childish sentiment and poor poetry, yet he insists as a matter of fact repeatedly observed. How does he describe this deeply personal, felt experience of life as God? It's one thing to intellectualize it, but another to feel it, right?
Absolutely. He acknowledges that his description might sound overly sentimental, perhaps even naive or simplistic to the rationalist.
Yeah.
He knows how it might come across.
Yeah, a bit woo-woo, perhaps.
Exactly. But he insists it's a direct, visceral experience, a matter of fact repeatedly observed in his own life. He describes feeling and emotion like the childhood piety he once felt when approaching communion or making his way through the Stations of the Cross in a traditional church setting.
Okay, that same feeling of reverence.
Yes. But now he feels this same profound reverence, this same sense of awe, not in a church, but in the presence of growing things.
So in nature.
Exactly. His worship has fundamentally shifted from traditional religious symbols and rituals to the tangible, observable reality of life unfolding all around him. It's an internal recognition of something sacred within the natural world itself.
And he offers some really concrete, beautiful examples of this new form of worship, almost like a secular litany. Can you share some of those?
Yes, he does. They're quite moving. He speaks about how he cannot look at any green shoots sprouting from the soil without feeling that in that mystic presence, I am closer to the essence of reality than when my grandson tries in vain to explain to me the marvels of the atom,
Wow, the green shoot over the atom, that's telling.
isn't it? This highlights the visceral, intuitive, and almost mystical nature of his belief, contrasting it sharply with the abstract, intellectual understanding of modern science. For him, the simple, observable act of a plant growing is more profoundly revelatory and spiritually moving than complex physics.
Makes sense for someone grounding their belief in life.
Right. He then offers a detailed, almost meditative description of a tree. He sees it pushing its roots ever more deeply and widely into the soil, yet lifting itself up to the sky as if in prayer for light and warmth, spreading its branches and unfolding 100,000 leaves to breathe the air and catch the sun.
That's beautiful imagery.
It really is. And in this observation, he finds a deep, almost empathetic connection. I feel in myself the same lust for light and growth. This tree and I are kindred souls sharing the same hunger and the same life.
Kinship with a tree, that's profound.
It's an intimate shared vitality, a recognition of a universal life force. He extends this to human examples, seeing fond parents frolicking with their children in the park as part of life's litany, a natural, joyous expression of this living force.
The simple joys.
Exactly. Even the poorest Madonna, sitting on the steps of her tenement and nursing her child, appears to him as a form and symbol of that living force which hides behind all mechanisms and moves, as Dante said, the sun and the other stars.
Referencing Dante there, connecting it back. Wow.
Yes. This is a powerful reinterpretation of the sacred, finding it not in the distant or supernatural, but in the mundane, the universal, and the ongoing, tangible process of life itself. It's an immanent spirituality, God in the world, not outside it.
That's a truly expansive and inclusive definition of worship, finding the sacred in the very fabric of existence, from a sprout to a nursing mother to a genius like Spinoza. So if we pull all these observations together from the atom to human genius, how does he ultimately define this God he has chosen to worship? What's the summary statement?
He provides a truly comprehensive and poetic definition, weaving together his observations into a cohesive whole. This, then, is the God I worship, the persistent and creative life that struggles up from the energy of the atom to make the earth green with growth, to stir the youth with ambition and the girl with tender longing, to mold the form of woman, to agitate geniuses, to guide the art of Phidias, and to justify itself in Spinoza and Christ.
That covers pretty much everything, the entire spectrum of life and creativity.
It does. This God isn't a distant anthropomorphic figure in the clouds, but an immanent active force present in everything from the smallest subatomic particle to the greatest human achievements in art, philosophy, and ethics. It's the driving force of evolution, creativity, and consciousness.
And he doesn't ignore the darker, harsher realities of nature or existence, which is important for his honesty, right? He acknowledged suffering earlier.
Absolutely. He has a crucial nuance to his vitalistic worship. I know that there are other aspects of reality than this life, that nature is rich in terrors as well as in beauty and development. All the more should I reverence and help all growing things.
So it's not a blind faith.
None at all. His worship, therefore, isn't blind optimism or a naive romanticization of nature. It encompasses both the awe-inspiring beauty and the harsh, indifferent, sometimes terrifying aspects of reality.
Okay.
Despite the terrors, he chooses to focus his reverence and action on fostering the good, the growth, the development, the creative striving of life. This pragmatic and ethical choice is central to his worldview.
Choosing to focus on the growth despite the terror.
Exactly. He also notes that this is a very old philosophy, otherwise I would distrust it. The fact that this vitalistic view has echoes in ancient thought, like various forms of pantheism or vitalism, lends it credibility for him, suggesting it's not merely a fleeting modern idea, but a recurring human insight throughout history, a testament to its enduring resonance.
So it's a God that is not a separate being, a distinct creator, but the very essence of existence, the universal life force itself. Our individual lives are just part of this larger current, then.
Precisely. He clarifies that his object of worship could not be such a separate and partial self. It is the sum and source of that universal vitality of which our little egos are abstracted fragments and experimental proliferations.
Experimental proliferations were like little offshoots of the main vine.
That's a perfect analogy. This is a profoundly interconnected view, where individual lives are not separate, static creations, but temporary manifestations, experimental proliferations of a single universal life force. Our individual existence, with all its struggles and triumphs, is part of something much, much larger, an ongoing, dynamic, cosmic process.
Okay.
And it's that larger, vital current that he reveres, finding meaning and purpose within its flow, rather than seeking a separate external deity.
So Durant has clearly redefined God for himself in a deeply personal and philosophical way, quite distinct from traditional understandings. But he's also keenly aware that his definition might not align with others. He anticipates being called an atheist, yet he's loath to leave the word God out of my life and creed. That's a strong statement. For someone who has so thoroughly reconceptualized the divine, why is it so important for him to retain that very word God, which is so loaded with traditional meaning? What's the attachment there?
This raises an important question for you, the listener. Why hold on to a word so loaded with traditional meaning when you've fundamentally reinterpreted it? Durant is keenly aware of the conventional understanding of God and the potential for misunderstanding, even accusations of intellectual dishonesty.
Right. People might say, that's not God, call it something else.
Exactly. Yet he insists on keeping it. He states, with profound intellectual humility and respect, I will respect your definition of deity. I will honor that of the lovable girls who attend a Catholic college just below the hill on which I have a home.
That's very respectful, acknowledging other views.
It isn't just politeness. It's a recognition of the deeply personal nature of belief and the inherent validity of diverse spiritual paths. He's acknowledging that his understanding doesn't invalidate theirs, and vice versa. He's not trying to impose his view.
And he follows that with a powerful analogy, almost a plea for understanding for his own unique perspective.
Yes, he uses the powerful analogy. Since we are all drops of water trying to analyze the sea, implying a shared, limited human perspective when confronting the vastness and mystery of existence.
We all have limited viewpoints.
Exactly. Given this inherent limitation, he asks for permission, not just from others, but almost from himself, to have his own definition, to use the word God in a way that resonates with his understanding of reality and his deepest spiritual needs.
Okay, so how does he justify keeping the word itself?
He then justifies his desire to keep the term God by outlining what he hasn't done and what he has accepted in his philosophical journey. First, he has rejected materialism, meaning he doesn't believe reality is solely composed of inert physical matter and its blind interactions.
Okay, so not pure materialism.
Second, he has accepted mind as the reality most directly known to me, grounding his understanding and subjective experience in consciousness as a primary mode of knowing.
Mind is real, maybe even primary.
Yes. And third, he has pictured the world as a scene not of blind mechanism, but of striving and creative life.
Back to that active, vital force.
Exactly. These 3 points fundamentally distinguish his worldview from a purely secular, reductionist, or mechanistic one. He's not denying a deeper principle. He's simply defining it in a radically immanent way. He sees something more than just atoms bumping around.
So he's not an atheist in the sense of denying any grand organizing principle or vital force. He simply defines that force, that something to worship, differently, in a way that aligns with his scientific and historical understanding. How then does he propose to keep and use the term God with this new understanding? What's his specific definition for the word?
He then explicitly lays out his chosen definition, the very one he asks permission to use, almost as if presenting a new covenant. He says, let me then keep the term God for the inventive vitality and abounding fertility of nature, the eon-long struggle of matter to rise from atomic energy to intelligence, consciousness, and informed and deliberate will, to statesmen, poets, saints, artists, musicians, scientists, and philosophers.
That's quite a mouthful, but very specific. God as the upward-striving creative force in nature and humanity.
Precisely. This is a comprehensive, almost evolutionary definition of God. It's the inherent force driving creation, complexity, and the ascent of consciousness and creativity within the natural world. His God isn't a singular entity outside nature, manipulating it from afar, but the inherent striving force within it, the very impulse that leads from the most basic atomic interactions to the highest forms of human achievement and understanding.
It's a process God, almost.
You could say that. He acknowledges the scientific origins of matter, but sees an undeniable, vital impulse driving it towards increasingly sophisticated forms of life and thought. He ends this section with a simple, powerful, and deeply human plea that resonates with a fundamental need. Let me have something to worship.
That hits hard. The basic human need for reverence.
Yes. This speaks to a core human yearning for reverence, for meaning, for something larger than oneself to inspire awe, devotion, and purpose. He hasn't lost the capacity for worship. He simply redirected it to a new, for him, more authentic and intellectually satisfying object. He needs that focal point.
That makes a lot of sense why he'd want to keep the word, even if redefined.
Yeah.
It fills that deep need. Okay, so beyond his personal theology and his redefinition of God, Durant delves into his own ethics, explicitly calling himself a Christian in the literal and difficult sense. But with characteristic honesty, he's also candid about a pagan side. How does he balance these two seemingly contradictory aspects of his life? It feels like a very honest, almost disarming self-assessment.
It really is. This is where you get a truly intimate look into the man himself, a blend of aspirational ethics and undeniable human reality. He isn't presenting himself as a perfect saint or a detached sage, but as a striving, complex individual, deeply self-aware of his own contradictions.
Very human.
Very. He identifies as Christian not through adherence to dogma, church affiliation, or specific rituals, but through sincerely admiring the personality and ethics of Christ.
So admiring Christ's ethics, not necessarily the divinity claims.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For him, it's not about theological belief in abstract doctrines, but making a persistent effort to behave like a Christian. This is a doing rather than a believing, an active, daily ethical commitment to embodying Christ's teachings and conduct and character, rather than merely assenting to a creed. It's an ethics of action.
Living the ethics.
That's the core of it for him.
But he immediately follows that with a very candid acknowledgement of his own human imperfections, which makes him incredibly relatable. He doesn't just claim the ideal.
Absolutely.
Right.
He honestly states, with a touch of wry humor, I am not quite a saint.
Which none of us are, really.
Right. This disarming honesty immediately makes him relatable to any of us struggling with our own ideals. He then provides some very specific, even charmingly candid examples of his pagan side, contrasting it with the idealized Christian.
Okay, like what?
He mentions several occasions attended and furtively enjoyed theatrical displays featuring the female form.
That's quite an admission for a respected historian.
It is. A glimpse into a private moment of enjoyment. And even more surprisingly, he reveals that even in my 90s, I have felt a strong erotic urge, which my recent illness seemed to have knocked out of me, but already I feel it coming back.
Wow, even in his 90s, that's remarkably frank.
It is a truly remarkable level of self-disclosure for a philosopher and historian of his stature, highlighting the enduring power of fundamental human drives throughout life, even into extreme old age.
So how does he reconcile these sides, the aspiring Christian and the honest pagan?
His synthesis of these two sides is truly revealing. He suspects he is a pagan as well as a Christian, respecting the pleasures of the senses as well as those of the mind, even while wishing that I could be as complete a Christian as Christ.
So acceptance and aspiration, side by side.
Exactly. This reveals a profound self-awareness and acceptance of human nature in all its complexity. He doesn't deny his desires or his earthly inclinations. He acknowledges them, integrates them into his self-understanding, and yet still strives towards a higher ethical ideal, embracing the striving as part of the journey. The tension is part of being human.
So he admits his human failings, his pagan side, but he also provides concrete evidence of his ethical conduct and how he has tried to live by these principles, perhaps even more rigorously than many who claim the Christian label more readily. He backs up the striving part.
Indeed. He doesn't just talk the talk. He demonstrates a lifetime of consistent ethical effort that is quite extraordinary. He and Ariel, his wife and intellectual partner, receive substantial royalties from their immensely successful books, but he states that they yield more than half of our income to taxes, and we give away half of the rest.
Wow, half of the rest after taxes. That's huge.
It's extraordinary philanthropy and a clear, intentional commitment to sharing their wealth, far beyond what's legally required. They always lived and dressed very simply, demonstrating a remarkable lack of attachment to material possessions or extravagant living, despite their means.
Lived simply despite the success.
Yes. And if they traveled, he stresses, it was almost always for toilsome research. I hate travel and love my home. This paints a vivid picture of a man dedicated to his intellectual work and to a simple, grounded existence, rather than chasing luxury or leisure.
Focused on the work and home.
In terms of interpersonal ethics, he makes a powerful claim. I have never, so far as I can remember, returned evil for evil, have never hated or condemned anyone.
Never returned evil for evil. That's a high bar.
A very high bar. This is a profound statement of forgiveness, non-judgment, and radical empathy, truly reflecting core Christian values of compassion. And on the larger scale of conflict, he reveals a selective pacifism. He, quote, never supported a war except that of America against Japan and Germany in 1941, emphasizing his deep aversion to violence, only making an exception for what he viewed as the most clearly defensive and necessary conflict against tyrannical regimes.
So generally pacifist, but not absolute in the face of extreme evil.
That seems to be his position. These examples provide a clear, undeniable picture of a life lived with intentional ethical purpose, despite his acknowledged human imperfections. He really did try to walk the walk.
It sounds like it. Given his deep reflections on ethics, his personal struggle to live by Christ's teachings, and his broad historical perspective, Durant shares a provocative vision for how he would spend another life. It's not at all what you'd expect from a historian or a philosopher of his renown, is it?
No, it really isn't. It's quite surprising.
What's this ideal future he imagines for himself and for humanity if he had a chance to start over?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a testament to his ultimate belief that applied ethics, the direct improvement of human conduct, rather than abstract philosophy or even the monumental task of writing history, is the ultimate contribution to humanity.
Action over academia, in the end.
That's the essence of it. It's a striking conclusion for someone who spent his entire life immersed in books, scholarship, and the grand narratives of the past. He says that if he could live another life with his present mind and mood, meaning with all the wisdom, perspective, and ethical understanding he's gained over his long life, he would not write history or philosophy.
Wow, that's huge coming from Will Durant. So no more story of civilization.
Apparently not. This is a truly remarkable statement from one of the 20th century's most prolific and successful historians and philosophers. He's indicating that for him, the greatest impact, the most meaningful endeavor, lies not in intellectual pursuits for their own sake, but in direct, tangible action to improve human conduct and societal morality.
So, he's saying that while history and philosophy illuminate the path, ethical action is the path. What would he do instead then, if given this hypothetical second chance? What's the action plan?
His ideal path, his ultimate calling, would be to devote myself to establishing an association of men and women free to have any tolerant theology or no theology at all.
An association based on ethics, not belief.
Exactly. This is incredibly inclusive, transcending religious divides and acknowledging the diversity of belief or lack thereof in a deeply respectful way. The foundation of this association wouldn't be shared dogma or creed, but a shared ethical commitment.
Okay, what commitment?
Members would be pledged to follow as far as possible the ethics of Christ. And he gets very specific about what those ethics would entail for his proposed fellowship of semi-saints.
Semi-saints, I like that. Realistic.
Yes. The pledge includes chastity before marriage, fidelity within it, extensive charity, and peaceful opposition to any but the most clearly defensive war.
So fairly traditional virtues, but framed very differently.
Precisely. These are traditional Christian virtues, but framed within an entirely non-dogmatic, action-oriented, and profoundly inclusive context. It's a vision of practical, lived morality open to anyone willing to make the pledge, regardless of their theological stance.
And he seems to be anticipating the skepticism, even the ridicule, such a visionary ideal might face in the real world. He's not naive about human nature, is he?
Not at all. He absolutely does.
Yeah.
He anticipates what fun the wits of the world could have with this paragraph, acknowledging how utopian, idealistic, or impractical his idea might seem to cynical minds.
Yeah, you can almost hear the jokes.
Right. He also knows how unpopular and precarious my proposed fellowship of semi-saints would be. He's not naive about the challenges of human nature, the difficulty of adhering to such high ethical standards in a complex, often cynical world.
It would be incredibly difficult.
No doubt. Yet, despite the likely ridicule and the daunting nature of the task, his ultimate priority is crystal clear. He concludes with a powerful statement of purpose that completely reprioritizes his life's work and legacy. I would rather contribute a microscopic mite to improving the conduct of men and statesmen than write the 100 best books.
Wow. Action over legacy. A tiny improvement in conduct over writing classics.
Yes, this is a historian, a philosopher, explicitly valuing direct, albeit small, action to improve human behavior over the academic legacy of writing monumental works of scholarship. It's a profound testament to his belief that wisdom, ultimately, must translate into ethical action for a better world, however imperfectly achieved. That's where the real value lies for him at the end of his life.
So what does this all mean for us, the listener? Durant's Fallen Leaves doesn't just offer his personal theology, it's an invitation, really, isn't it? An invitation to examine our own relationship with belief, doubt, and the profound forces that shape our lives.
Definitely an invitation.
He manages to be deeply skeptical, yet profoundly reverent, finding the sacred not in distant deities, but in the vibrant, striving essence of life itself, and in the ongoing, often imperfect human effort to live ethically. It's a reminder that the quest for meaning is as vital as the knowledge we accumulate, maybe more so.
And that quest doesn't require abandoning reason, nor does reason require abandoning reverence. This raises an important question for you, the listener, to carry forward from this deep dive. If, like Durant, you were to look at the world through a lens of both critical observation and deep personal feeling, stripping away inherited dogmas or expectations, what would emerge as your own God?
What would you find sacred?
Exactly. What would be the inventive vitality you choose to revere, or the ethics you commit to living by, even if it feels unpopular or imperfectly achieved in a complex world? It's a journey not of finding definitive answers, because maybe there aren't any single answers.
Right. Maybe it's about the journey itself.
It's about continuing to ask the questions and finding meaning and purpose in the exploration itself, in the dynamic unfolding of life within and around you, moment by moment. That ongoing process is the point, perhaps.